Good morning. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph's National Gathering hosted by St. Joseph's University. I'm Martha Malinsky, Executive Director of the Association. The Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph draws together 9 colleges and universities founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph to articulate and further the educational mission and legacy of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Our conference theme this year is Forward Together. Over the course of the next 2 days, conference participants will have the opportunity to reflect on our shared history as institutions founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph, to highlight current work across the 9 member campuses, to connect with colleagues, to highlight and discuss current issues in higher education, and to inspire a call to action to move forward together, united in the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Thank you to those that have helped make this conference happen and who are our sponsors. The Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet in the St. Louis province, St. Joseph Educational Ministries, Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet and Consociates of the St. Paul province, Sisters of St. Joseph of Springfield, and the U.S. Federation of the Sisters of St. Joseph, as well as each of our member campuses. Thank you to all of these sponsors for their generous support. It also takes a village to organize and produce a conference. Thank you to our host campus, St. Joseph's University, and especially the IT team that is behind the scenes today and tomorrow. Thank you too to the conference committee that created this program. I am so glad that you are here with us today. In fact, there are over 200 registered attendees joining us over the next 2 days from the West Coast to the East Coast and in the Midwest. To begin our time together, let's begin in prayer. I'd like to introduce my colleagues from St. Joseph's University, Dr. Sheldon and Sister Marie.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Vernon Shelton, Director of Campus Ministry on the Brooklyn campus of St. Joseph University, New York. I would like to welcome you this morning to the 2023 Association of Colleges of Sisters of St. Joseph National Gathering. As we gather for prayer, let us remember the humble beginnings of each of our academic institutions, especially our foundresses, the Sisters of St. Joseph, whose dream to unite neighbor with neighbor and neighbor with God has borne fruit for 187 years here in the United States. 2 weeks ago, the church celebrated the Feast of Pentecost and the gifts of the Holy Spirit to the beloved community. As we begin our time together, let us pray with the words of the Book of Wisdom.
Reading from the Book of Wisdom. Resplendent and unfading is wisdom, and she is readily perceived by those who love her and found by those who seek her. She hastens to make herself known to those who desire her. One who watches for her at dawn will not be disappointed, for she will be found sitting at the gate. For setting your heart on her is the perfection of prudence, and whoever keeps vigil for her is quickly free from care. Because she makes her rounds seeking those worthy of her and graciously appears to them on the way and goes to meet them with full attention. For in wisdom is a spirit, intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, agile, clear, unstained, certain, never harmful, loving the good, keen, unhampered, beneficent, kindly, firm, secure, tranquil, all-powerful, all-seeing, and pervading all spirits, though they be intelligent, pure, and very subtle. For wisdom is mobile beyond all motion, and she penetrates and pervades all things by reason of her purity. For she is a breath of the might of God and a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty. Therefore, nothing defiled can enter into her. For she is the reflection of eternal light, the spotless mirror of the power, the image of God's goodness. Although she is one, she can do all things, and she renews everything while herself perduring. passing into holy souls from age to age. She produces friends of God and prophets.
Gracious God, grant us wisdom as we live the mission of radical inclusive love in our respective institutions. Teach us your ways as we guide present and future generations of students to live lives of integrity and service. May we always hear the cries of the marginalized among us, including our wondrous planet Earth. May we stand in awe of the power of God to transform our weakness into strength and our hardened hearts into stone flesh. We ask all things in Jesus Christ, our brother. Amen.
My name is Don Baumgarten. I'm the president of St. Joseph's University, New York, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the national gathering. I am representing the presidents of our association today in expressing our gratitude to all of you for joining in, and to those of you who have made it possible for us to have this gathering today, a special word of thanks and appreciation. So I think we should certainly thank Martha for her hard work in bringing us all together today, as well as Michelle Papajohn and the wonderful IT team of St. Joseph's University. Originally, we had planned to do this gathering in person, but it was decided for many reasons, and I think all of them good, to go ahead and do a virtual version of today's gathering and tomorrow's gathering. I think that it's an opportunity for us to come together and to grow closer during a time of great challenge. As all of you know, this is a very, very difficult time in higher education. I know every college, every university in our association is facing the same kinds of challenges. But I think we saw during the pandemic that our institutions are especially resilient to these challenges because of the tradition that we hold, the faith that we share, the belief in something greater. And all of those things combine to create a really powerful force. As the chair of the presidents, I feel this many times when I'm sitting in their presence and we're talking about the major issues facing all of us today. That sense of collegiality and the sense of optimism is irrepressible. And I think that spirit is a part of the tradition that we have learned from the Sisters of St. Joseph. We've learned how to deal with adversity and how to turn adversity into an opportunity for growth and for change. So I hope that you enjoy today's presentations and panels. They've been very thoughtfully prepared. People have worked very, very hard, and I'm excited to participate my own way with this national gathering. And now I'd like to introduce Sister Angela Gannon from the Brentwood congregation, who has a few words for us today. Sister Angela is a dear friend of mine and is also a member of the Board of Trustees of St. Joseph's University and is a longtime contributor to this university's success. And so she's not only representing Brentwood, but in a strange way, she also represents St. Joseph's University. So Sister Angela. And sister, you might want to be sure you're not muted.
Okay. Thank you, Don. On behalf of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Brentwood, I'm happy to welcome all of you to this conference. Only wishing that you were in New York and able to enjoy the beautiful campus of St. Joseph's University in Brooklyn. In a special way, I welcome you on behalf of all Sisters of St. Joseph who have been associated with your own college and who have given the best of their years to the ministry of higher education. You have cast your lot with the Sisters of St. Joseph across the United States. And with that comes a commitment to our mission and charism. Indeed, as the number of sisters continues to decrease in our ministries, we turn to you to continue the legacy that you have received and which you will pass on to future generations. A legacy of academic excellence, lifelong learning, critical conversations, attention to the needs of the total community, always with a desire to live and to work that all may be one, to love without distinction. Now more than ever, we need to move forward together. All things are possible. Most of all, the sisters are with you in many and different ways. Blessings on your days together and gratitude to all those who have contributed to this conference. Have a great time.
Thank you, President Baumgarten and Sister Angela Gannon. We are so thankful for your warm welcome. We feel the spirit of hospitality here today as we join in from across the country. As we think about moving forward together, our conference theme, it is important to reflect on our history. To do this, I'd like to introduce our first session, Institutional Sagas of CSJ and SSJ Colleges and Universities, facilitated by Dr. Brian Matz, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet Endowed Chair of Catholic Thought at Fontbonne University. Dr. Matz, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Martha, and thanks to all of you at St. Joseph's who have helped us in hosting this conference today, our national gathering. It's a delight to be able to share with you. So good morning. You know, between 1900 and the year 1960, many of us probably don't realize this, but the Sisters of St. Joseph opened no less than 18 colleges, 18 of them. There might be more. I'm aware of 18. 10 continue to operate today. 9 of them are members of our association. But just think about that for a moment. Between 1900 and 1960, they opened 18 colleges. Some of the same sisters were involved in opening more than one of those colleges. And many of the later colleges were opened only after having witnessed the viability of the institutions that were opened before their own. And it was this insight that led us at Fontbonne 3 years ago to ask what might we learn about the founding and educational visions of our own university by learning something about the founding and educational visions of those institutions that opened before our own. We wondered about this because Fontbonne was approaching our centennial year. We just finished celebrating our centennial year. And when we look around the campus today, it looks very different than it did in 1923. And I don't just mean it looks different in terms of our physical plant. The types of students we enroll today are very different than those who enrolled here in 1923. The number of sisters on campus is very different. The academic program offerings have almost completely changed. So much about the institution has changed. And yet there is a question, is there in any real sense a connection between who we are today and what we were in 1923? Is there something of that DNA that was in place in 1923 when we opened that we can still reclaim and renew and recommit ourselves to in 2023? You know, Sister Angela just said a moment ago that we've received a legacy. And she asked, will we carry on that legacy? Right? We've been given it, and it's our hope that we do, in fact, carry that on. It's been passed on to us. And so we certainly here at Fontbonne began to ask ourselves, why was our college built in the first place? What was the educational vision of the sisters who founded our institution? Moreover, in light of the fact that Fontbonne was built after several other colleges from the sisters were already opened, we asked ourselves, what might we be able to learn about our founding from the stories of those who came before us? Because there was interaction. The woman who founded Fontbonne University, Mother Agnes Ryan, had in fact been at the dedication ceremony of St. Kate's and had been involved in conversations about over the founding and the building construction of that college. And that was true also for a couple of the other institutions between the founding of St. Kate's, the opening of St. Kate's and the opening of our own institution. In any case, in January 2022, so about 18 months ago, Fontbonne hosted a symposium here on the early histories of our member campuses. An archivist or an historian, sometimes both, from each of our member institutions were invited to examine early documents in your university or college archives, maybe a diocesan archives, perhaps the archives of the local province, but to begin to glean from those early documents, why was our college, why was your particular college built? And second, what was the educational vision of the sisters for your college and for our institution here at Fontbonne? Now, the result of that symposium is a very recently published book. And so I just hold it up so you can see it. But this book includes the published presentations of those who spoke at the conference, and it telling us the story of the founding of most of our institutions in our association. Just so you know, a copy of this book was sent to each of your institution's libraries about 2 weeks ago. And so it is hoped that in the next week or so, you'll find it eventually added to your collection. And so if you're interested, you can get a copy at your own institution. Well, in our presentation today, I would like to just give you a little insight to some of the things that we learned at our symposium 18 months ago, but also a little insight into some of the things that you would find if you looked at this particular volume. You know, why were our institutions founded? What were the sisters thinking? What were they doing? Why did they get involved in higher education? They have been very successful in elementary and secondary education. Why make this leap into the world of post-secondary education with all of its attendant responsibilities, accreditation standards that were very different, and the tremendous expense of building a brand new sort of physical plant? And so today, we're just going to give you a little snippet of that and have a conversation. I'm just going to ask my colleagues some questions, and they're going to share with you just for a couple minutes each, a little insight into the founding of their institution. And we want to develop a little picture. And we invite you listening here today to send us questions through the Q&A option there at the bottom of the screen. And we'll have some time for Q&A and just get to interact with you and talk about what it was like for the sisters to open these institutions. What were some of the things that we can learn today? What's the benefit for our own sense of mission and identity today as a result of learning something about the DNA that the sisters sort of put into our institutions at their founding? But I've invited 4 colleagues to join us here today. One is Dr. Jane Carroll, Professor of History of St. Catherine's University, St. Kate's, and she'll be speaking to us from the perspective there of St. Kate's and have a chance to dialogue here about some of the things that she also learned from our symposium. The same is true with Dr. Jeff Marlette, longtime professor of religion and also an administrator in several capacities at the College of St. Rose, now at Unity Environmental University. And published his chapter in our book on the College of St. Rose and its founding. And we'll have much interesting things to share about that as well as connecting the dots with some of the other institutions. Then Dr. Beth Murphy, Executive Director of the Libraries there at St. Joseph's University in Brooklyn, New York. So we thank you, Beth, for joining us as well. also provided us a really tremendous insight into the founding of St. Joseph's University, digging into some of the original board meeting documents and some of the early student records in your archives there. And so a really tremendous contribution to our volume. So that'll be 3 presenters from the academic institutions. And then we're really privileged to have Sister Mary Flick with us. Sister Mary Flick, at the time of our symposium a year and a half ago, was the one responsible for launching St. Joseph's Educational Ministries and was directing the formation of the original members of that board. St. Joseph Educational Ministries, if you don't know, is a new sponsoring entity for institutions in the St. Louis province, the 2 universities, Avila and Fonfon, as well as 2 high schools and Nazareth Living Center, retirement home for the sisters. And so that entity is now our canonical sponsor and helps us stay in good standing with the Vatican and remain as Catholic universities and Catholic institutions. So we're delighted to have her, and she speaks to us with a wealth of experience in higher education, having had multiple roles in various institutions and being able to help us see the big picture of mission, heritage, and identity, and what we learned from our early histories, how that ought to translate for us into what we do today. So we're just going to get started. I have 3 questions I'll ask our panelists, and we'll just hear from them for about half an hour, 40 minutes or so with these 3 questions, and then we're going to turn it over to you. And we would love to interact with you on your questions that you have for us, and maybe questions you have about your own institution's founding. And to the extent we can be a part of helping, that we'll be happy to do that. So I'd like to begin with the first question to our panelists. So for Drs. Jane Carroll, Jeff Marlette, and Beth Murphy, we'll take them one at a time. We'll go around the room. I have Dr. Jane Carroll here is first on my screen, so we'll turn to her first, and we'll let her answer the question. Then Jeff Marlette, and then Beth Murphy. And then I have a separate question for Sister Mary Flick. So first, Jane, Jeff, and then Beth, what's the condition of the archives for your institution? What's the condition of the archives? If people in our audience today would like to go look at the histories of our respective institutions, what's the condition of the archives when you began to dig into them? And what resources exist to help people learn about the early histories of our institution? So if you could just take a couple of minutes and talk to us about what's it like to just do this early history work? What's the condition of the documents and the archives? What did you find in your work?
Well, here in St. Paul, we have 2 wonderful archives that are very close to each other, actually geographically in proximity. We have, of course, the St. Kate's archives, which is in the library here on campus, but then also the St. Paul Province archives, which are located adjacent to our campus. And I would say the condition of both archives is quite good and extensive. So if you were to come and do research, what you'd find at the St. Kate's archives, of course, would be all the files on the history of the curriculum at the college, the history, the presidents, all the files on the presidents are in the St. Kate's archives. There have been a number of important resources that have been digitized so that you can get to those online, including, for example, all of the Ariston publications, which was the arts and literature publication. The student newspaper is now available. That's digitized as well. And so there are both digital and archival resources here. What I have found in doing this work over the years is that I've been so impressed with the extent of the historical work that's been done by the sisters that you can find in the archives. So there are a lot of unpublished or histories that have not been published outside the community or outside of the archives. that are just incredibly valuable resources. For example, if you go to the St. Paul Province archives, you will find lots of histories on the institutions, the educational institutions that the sisters here founded before the college, which were really significant, and in particular, St. Joseph Academy, which was really the antecedent to the College of St. Catherine. There are these wonderful unpublished manuscripts and reports that really contain so much valuable information. I've been so impressed with the historical work that sisters have done in the past and continue to do. For example, at the St. Paul Province Archives, there's a wonderful unpublished manuscript that's a biography of John Ireland, Archbishop Ireland, by Sister Helen Angela Hurley, that contains all kinds of valuable information about the sisters and St. Kate's as well. So there are a lot of resources in both the archives here, I think, for anyone looking to do the work.
Thank you, Jane. I'd like to just amplify one of the things you mentioned, and this is true if for those of you at institutions maybe who are not currently represented on this panel. It should be clear in our symposium last year, it became rather important that the presence of an academy and that whether the academy was successful was a significant is significantly correlated with whether the sisters opened a college. The fact that there was an academy before and it was financially successful and it was academically rigorous and the sisters felt confident to then move on to the next level post-secondary education, that was a significant contributing factor. So thank you for mentioning that. I just want to amplify that. All of our institutions could say we began because there was a prior academy that had existed for, in some cases, decades beforehand. And it really gave the sisters confidence to move into the next stage of educational development. Dr. Jeff Marlette, tell us a little bit about the condition of the archives at the College of St. Rose. It's going to be a very different story than what we hear about St. Kate's.
Yeah, it is a very different story. The archives of the Troy province of the sisters now reside at a Carondelet with the Consolidated Carondelet Archive under the excellent development of Catherine Lucy. And so some of the information about the founding of St. Rose actually is housed in St. Louis. The college itself has its own archives that is improving. There was not a college archivist officially appointed from 2014 until at least when I left St. Rose last spring in 2022. However, the archives were under the very diligent and concerted care of Sister Honora Kinney, who served as an archivist. And Sister Honora did a yeoman's work in terms of just keeping the archives open, but also gathering resources from a number of different sources. So, for example, one of the things I found very important, and I think will be important for future reference, is that the archives already do have holdings from going back to 1920, the opening of the college, with student publications, and Sister Honora picked up on that. So there is a complete run of college yearbooks and a very good collection of student newspapers, which I didn't focus on as much, but those things are as well. There are two other, or actually there's one other archive which has some minimal holdings and is quite frankly a little bit difficult to access, and that's at the Roman Catholic Diocese of Albany. And that makes sense because Bishop Edmund Gibbons played such a founding part with the founding of the college and served as its president until 1950. So the archives are there, and they are improving in terms of their care and concern, largely because, Brian, because you contacted me and Sister Honora about this project, I then went to St. Rose's administration, President Marshall White, and the provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Margaret McLean, to alert them to the situation that the archives were in. Like the college's own history was, to some degree, under threat, and that has since been rectified. So that's good. One last thing that I'm glad to hear Jane Carroll mention, because it's the exact same thing that I was able to enjoy at St. Rose, and that is unpublished histories of an institution by the sisters who served and lived there. And there are 3 that I was able to make use of, and these are excellent resources and unpublished. One is the master's thesis by then Sister Catherine Frances Soulier, who then became St. Rose's first, or the second president, but the first sister to become a president in 1953. And then a privately published history by Mary Rosalind Gilroy in 1981, which makes use of Soulier's history. So we had the archives have these 2 histories that only exist there. So you have to go to the campus and go into the library to be able to read these things. And they are a fascinating repository, one, just because of the history they cover, but also as a snapshot of the time at which they covered it. So Soulier's history is not Gilroy's. And then finally, even though she would not admit this, but I certainly cite it, is that Sister Honora herself produced a vitally important unpublished paper of at least 60 pages detailing the historical and cultural forces and personalities involved with the founding of the college in 1920, including the 4 founders, Blanche Rooney, Sister Blanche Rooney, Bishop Edmund Gibbons, Monsignor Joseph Delaney, and someone that Beth Murphy knows about, and that is Augustus Downing, who was the Assistant Secretary of Education for the state of New York and a Lutheran. And he played a constitutive part, not just in the founding of St. Rose. In fact, St. Rose was the 3rd Catholic women's college he helped found in the state. The first 2 were St. Joseph's and the College of New Rochelle. So Sister Honora's paper works with Soulier and Gilroy's private histories to lay out the way in which these 4 individuals helped found the college in 1920. And again, the only place you can find these are in the archives. They're at the campus in Albany.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, I just appreciate you mentioning this. For those in our audience today who are thinking, oh, I'd like to know a little bit more about our campus history, that it really is not easy in some cases to find the information. It's buried away in unpublished materials and in archives. And that was one of the reasons why we published this book. This book gives you a guide to those resources. It tells you where they are, what documents to ask for if you show up at the archives. So this book is a sort of a guide to the sources, and we hope it's useful to many of you in the audience who want to do your own research, perhaps for a little project or something of your own for your respective campus, where you want to access something of that early DNA of the institution, the early legacies the sisters were leaving. We hope this book is a help to you for that. But Beth Murphy, I will let you tell us a little bit about, very briefly here, the St. Joseph's University's archives.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff is right. We found out in the winter of 2022 that we had Augustus Downing in common. Actually, Albany and Brooklyn aren't that far apart, and it was the same state education system. But I found that that theme within the Diocese of Brooklyn. Diocese of Brooklyn was only founded in 1853. It had been tied to, Manhattan and the rest of the city. And it was decided that the population growth in Brooklyn and Queens was just expanding in a tremendous speed, very, very densely populated. So they created a new diocese. Well, within 3 years, the Sisters of St. Joseph had been invited by the bishop, who was Bishop Laughlin, to teach, because he knew they had a reputation as excellent teachers. And that was what we call K-12 today. But they wound up, by the time they got involved with St. Joe's, the first documents I could find, because you're looking for a prequel, really. You're looking for something, correspondence before something was founded. Was by 1915, they had 40 elementary schools and 6 academies. And the students coming out of those academies were doing very, very well. And I know that this actually has to do with our second question. So the condition of our archive, though, I have an advantage. I have a key because it's in the library and I'm the library director. So I was there Monday. I just walked upstairs with a key. but it's unpublished, and that's the situation. Most of these histories are unpublished. The really excellent one we have was written by a Sister Joan DeLourdes Leonard. She was a scholar in her own right. She was one of the first sisters to get the PhD. She was also, and I hate to say this, but I forget where she went, but she didn't take the traditional path of going to a Catholic university. I believe she was Ivy League trained, and I think it was Yale. But she, during her years at St. Joe's, was given release time because she was a true scholar of the early American Revolution, and she was allowed to go to archives in France over the summer to see, relationship with Lafayette, whatever. She was at a time when women, Catholic women and religious women in a full habit were not necessarily called upon as experts in something like the American Revolution. She really was. She was invited by people all over to speak. So she wrote for the 50-year Jubilee, which was 1966. She wrote an excellent history. And I was so grateful to count on that because of the fact that she references things that I still can't find originals of. She references a lot, and that she was a serious historian and really did her work. So as far as the condition of our archive, again, a lot is unpublished, but the good news is quite a bit in 2016 was digitized by Internet Archive. So all the college catalogs, all the yearbooks, and some other documents are available. And I know we don't have chat. I think we just have, I can get the URL out. And a word of caution, the URL is changing. So, but anyone can always contact me for the guide page for our archive. There are 3,000 photographs. We hang our heads and say they are on Flickr, and we've got to get them off Flickr. We need them on something more truly archival. We're looking into archive space, Content DM, something that where we can have them more appropriately. But you can look at them today, and there's 3,000 photographs. And most of them even identify the people in them. Our finding aid right now is, I'll say it's unpublished. It's an internal on a shared drive, fabulous spreadsheet, but it's not something open to the public. We're hoping to develop a finding aid that we can put on our guide page, which will give people an idea of what we have, and they can see all of our unpublished treasures. And then if they would like to, they could make an appointment. The archive is by appointment only. But if the finding aid's out there, we can scan and send things to people too. I mean, that's the beauty of scanning. So that's our condition right now. And again, I was lucky because I had a key and I just went in whenever I wanted to. But one of the most valuable things I found, and a lot of this goes into the next question, were initially there were Board of Trustees minutes. And those were interesting. They were final decisions, or the faculty want to do this. I'll never forget the day I found the faculty meeting minutes, because that's where the real conversations take place. And that's where hearts are broken, and we're doing this and we're not doing that. And those were fabulous. And those again are unpublished, but I had them scanned for me. So
excellent. Thank you very much. Yes, we learn about our histories, always looking in the places where you least expect to find the information, right? The official documents don't always tell you the real story, and you have to dig below the surface, just as we would in any sort of topic today. We'd want to know what the real story is and not just the official line. So thanks for amplifying that for us. Well, Sister Mary, you have this privileged role of kind of sitting from the outside, looking in at all of our institutions and thinking about the big questions at stake. And I'm just curious, so what are your thoughts here? What's the contribution of learning an institution's history to its mission and identity today? Why is this an important project for those in our audience today in connecting it to our mission and identity?
Well, thanks, Brian. I'd like to maybe go back even a little bit further than our history to the beginnings of our history as CSJs, to one of our spiritual founders, Saint Francis de Sales. And he says to us and to all be who you are and be that well. And I hear Francis saying, embrace your own uniqueness as individuals and as CSSJ institutions. I think that uniqueness and the spirit that animates it is revealed in our stories, our histories. It's the spirit that underlies our histories. That's the spirit that unites us. It's our mission and identity. It's a common ground on which all of us are standing. We are all institutions of higher education founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph. And that common ground, I think, is part of each of our histories and our common mission, a love that unites amid all of our diversity. Now, each of us have very unique histories, and each of those histories are peppered with one-of-a-kind stories and very unique personalities. And yet there are themes in the midst of all those stories and personalities that unite all of us. And those themes, I think, really reveal our mission identity. So I invite all of us, to listen to our stories as institutions and to the stories of our colleagues and their institutions, and discover stories of bold choices and actions, of creativity and ingenuity in meeting those challenges, and to hear stories of trust in God and in one another. I think our histories reveal our spirit and really enliven our mission, kind of giving it flesh and bones through which our mission breathes. I think our histories also give us a mirror to look at today. And by gazing into our histories, I think we're enabled to see a similar boldness and ingenuity and trust among today's committed mission-centered administrators and faculty and staff. Because I really think our history and our mission are one.
Thank you very much, Sister. Appreciate it. Well, I'd like to follow up with that. You just mentioned this idea of bold, courageous action. And I'd like to ask my colleagues here to just go around and share with us a little bit about what did your examination of the early documents of your institution, what did it suggest was the reason your institution was founded? Was there maybe perhaps a moment of a bold, courageous action or some bold, courageous idea that they had that was a part of the founding of your respective institution? So could you tell us a little bit about what you learned about why your institution was founded? And if you can add for us maybe even an anecdote of a bold, courageous kind of action that was a part of it, that would be delightful. And we'll go around the room here the same way. So Sister Jane, Dr. Carol, turn to you first. Sorry.
Yeah, so as early as the 1880s, when Mother Seraphine Ireland became the provincial superior in St. Paul, she early on was expressing a plan or a hope to establish a women's college. And I think for her and the sisters, it would be kind of a logical culmination of the trajectory that they have been on since 1851, when they founded St. Joseph's Academy, and it was continuing to evolve and become more rigorous. And, so this focus on academic excellence to be the best institution it could be at a certain point. By the 1880s, Mother Seraphine was recognizing that she, for example, that her sisters who were teaching in the academy needed to get further education, because what was happening at the time was most of the sisters who were teaching at St. Joseph's Academy, which was the premier institution, were basically graduating from the academy and then becoming the teachers. And so from the 1880s on, when she became provincial superior, Mother Seraphine was really focused on how to get further education for her teaching sisters in the academy. And by the 1890s, for example, she was sending some to the University of Minnesota, or bringing in professors from other institutions, to give them further education. So when I look back on the Sisters of St. Joseph and St. Paul, and particularly the leadership of Mother Seraphine, it was this striving for academic excellence and continuing to evolve. And so it seemed that, again, St. Kate's, College of St. Catherine was a logical capstone. One practical reason for establishing the college would be that she would have a place, the sisters would have a place to further educate themselves, right, for the teaching faculty. And that was at a time, of course, when, it wasn't really the done thing for some Catholic religious sisters to go off and to go on to get, especially at secular institutions, a degree of further education. So I think the way I see this is, if you look kind of, there are internal factors and external factors. So I think Mother Seraphine and her sisters were ambitious. I think they were ambitious, educationally ambitious. And so that's what, when I look at it, that's what I see happening. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that she was working in close partnership with her brother, Archbishop John Ireland. They were building the Catholic educational infrastructure of the Archdiocese together. John Ireland established his college for men, St. Thomas, in the 1880s, the same time that Mother Seraphine was expressing her desire to do the same for women. And she had the full support and encouragement of her brother in that endeavor. And in fact, the college would have been founded sooner if it hadn't been for the financial panic or the Depression of 1893, which really set them back in terms of being able to raise the money. So she was just as ambitious as Archbishop John Ireland was in terms of the educational infrastructure and building that for the Catholics in the city and in the Archdiocese. There's also a broader context here that we have to think about historically, which is that, from the 1880s through the early part of the 20th century, this is the era of what historians call the New Woman. More and more American middle-class women were going to college, and they were going now to the new women's colleges that were established, but also to secular co-ed institutions. And so there was this kind of broader recognition by Catholics that Catholics were falling behind in higher education, especially the higher education of women. There were Catholic men's colleges, but really none for women when you look at, the early 1890s. So that is kind of the broader context in which all this is going on as well. So in terms of being bold, it was bold to be a woman who was a leader in the way that Mother Seraphine was. I think it was bold. And I think she was ambitious for the sisters and for their mission of educating women.
Yeah, thank you very much. If I could just say two things. One, also, you didn't mention Sister Antonia McHugh, but an early leader of St. Kate's, just absolutely solid academic and pushing for academic excellence. I mean, just ever raising the bar at St. Kate's, that this would be a place of preeminence, that women would be coming here, not settling for second best. Absolutely the best educational experience, and herself having been educated. Well,
Sister Antonia was chosen by Mother Seraphine and by Archbishop Ireland. It was basically their choice in leading the college.
Yes, so her story is excellent, and if you're interested in learning more about her story, again, Dr. Carroll's chapter in our book does give a good understanding of her role in the strengthening of the institution in the early decades. The other thing I was going to mention, you just in addition to the era of the New Woman, you also have this movement called Americanism going on in the Catholic Church. And you mentioned Bishop John Ireland, who was a central figure in that movement within the Catholic Church. So for those listening in our audience, we won't take the time to discuss it here, but if you're interested in understanding why all these Catholic women's colleges are being opened at this time in addition to what was happening in the wider culture, there was also a change taking place within Catholic culture, and it's called the Americanist movement or Americanism. And you can Google that and learn about it if you want to understand more about what was happening in sort of the internal politics of the Catholic Church at the time, and why people like Bishop John Ireland were pushing so heavily for a democratizing of the church and an expansion of opportunities, not just, yes, for women, for men too, for laity to take on greater responsibility in the life of the church. But you can learn about that by Googling that on your own later. But let's move over to Jeff and tell us a little bit about what was the educational vision what was the reason for the founding, of College of St. Rose? What did you learn in that process?
Well, I learned lots, actually. It's amazing. I found after working in an institution over 20 years, I found this project to be, there wasn't a day where I would walk out of the archives with Sister Honora and I would look at some part of the campus and go, oh, now I get it. Now I understand where this happened or whatever. And that could be something like the Rosa Mystica statue, which was set up by Blanche Rooney's family in tribute to her 50th anniversary of entering the sisters in 1939, still on campus, or for that matter, even a window pattern in what is now Albertus Hall. For anyone who from St. Rose who's tuning into this, what used to be the old faculty break room on the the fourth floor of Albertus Hall was the Fatima Shrine that was put there in 1946. So I was like, oh, now I get it. So there were things like that came along, and the reason why St. Rose is where it is because there was nothing there before it. There was Deauville College in Buffalo. There was St. Joseph's College in Brooklyn. And then there's nothing going to the east until you get to Holy Cross and Worcester. And then, if you go north, you have to cross the border going to Montreal. And there's not a Catholic college at all, and certainly not one for Catholic women. And the spark that lit all this, now underneath it all, by the way, Jane Carroll's comments about Bishop John Ireland also have a ripple effect to Albany, because Bishop Gibbons' first two predecessors, Cusack and Burke, were both friends and sympathetic to the Americanist agenda of Bishop Ireland. So you tend to think of, Albany, it's a smaller city, overwhelmingly filled with Irish Americans and kind of suppressing, other ethnic Catholic immigrant communities. And the atmosphere prior to the founding of the college in Albany was actually progressive in that sense, that we can do this. And what started it all finally was one of the women who became one of the sisters who was on the faculty the very first day, Sister John Joseph Moran, graduated from Cathedral Academy just south of the Cathedral, the Immaculate Conception there in downtown Albany, and promptly went to the Albany State Teachers College on Western Avenue in Midtown Albany. And that was what got her principal, Monsignor Joseph Delaney, very interested in founding a college, because one of his star students left Catholic education to go get a degree from a secular institution. The only other place in the area that admitted women at the time was then Skidmore Academy. It's now Skidmore College in Saratoga, which is a very different kind of very different kind of a women's education. All the other institutions in the area, Williams College, Union College, places like that, they were only all male. So there wasn't anything there. Gibbons, having served as a priest and had been ordained to serve in the Diocese of Buffalo and knew about Deauville, and Augustus Downing, Beth Murphy's, one of the influences behind Beth Murphy's story, had worked already at two institutions and was living in Albany around the corner from where St. Rose is founded. So you've got these folks who know about Catholic institutions forming in other cities, and they recognize that there's nothing there in the capital state of New York. And then finally, Blanche Rooney, the sister, was the one who organizes all this, and she's the one that actually makes it happen. She's the one that signs the lease and like that buys the building. That's 979 Madison Avenue that becomes St. Rose Hall. She's the one that, does it all. It's kind of like the old, for those of you who remember the Catholic Worker with, Peter Morin once wrote that the man proposes and the woman disposes. Like she's the one that actually does it. And it was, Blanche Rooney is the one that takes all these forces from these three men, one of whom, remember, is a Lutheran. Still can't get over that. Because again, you kind of think of, this is pre-Vatican II, right after the First World War. Catholic identity is, really building up bricks and mortar Catholicism. And here's this, he's the oldest guy in the group, the oldest person in the group, actively helping, working behind the scenes at the State Department of Education to get the paperwork through the state so the college can be founded. But what started all was when who became Sister John Joseph Moran graduated from high school and went to a different college. And Delaney said, we got to do something because we're losing them.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, that's something you mentioned something else that I just wanted to highlight here. If you, for you listening, for all of you in the audience here too, if you look at, if you think about the motto of your respective institution, in most cases in our association, the motto of the school makes reference not just to the sort of the academic purposes of the institution, but also the moral formation purposes of your institution. At least at Fontbonne, our motto here is virtus et scientia, virtue and knowledge. Virtue is first. It's part and parcel with the cultivation of knowledge. And so this idea that our campuses were built, every one of our member institution campuses were built, yes, to meet a need that wasn't there for Catholic higher education for women, but also because there was a genuine concern that if these Catholic women went to a secular or a state university of some sort, that they might fall away from the faith. They might get involved in immoral kinds of, be exposed at least to immoral sorts of behaviors and activities. And so creating a different kind of environment on the campus is part of the DNA of our institutions. It's part of why we became what we did in those early days, and perhaps I think in many cases still attendant to those.
If I could butt in just for a second, as proof of that also, though, that's clearly also, you mentioned Americanism. The original description of the College of St. Rose seal makes it clear that the colors of the seal, which I, for my 22 years, always knew as like black and white or like, black and gold, the college athletic colors. The college seal originally was painted red, white, and blue. And conscientiously referenced, these are the colors of the American flag. And, we're not just, good Catholics, but we're good Americans, and, almost a different sense of pride. So it's still very American and patriotic, but it's, like a patriotism in a different flavor.
Yes, thank you. Now, just so you know, we're about 10 minutes away from our Q&A portion. So I'd like to invite those of you in our audience to start thinking about questions you'd like to pose to us. You can add them in the Q&A box there at the bottom of the screen, type them in. But we're going to move on to Beth Murphy and tell us a little bit about, just very briefly here, what about the founding of St. Joseph's University? Why was your institution founded?
Okay, as I mentioned previously, they had 6 academies, all girls high schools, but there was one in particular, the Academy of St. Joseph, which was located in Brentwood, which eventually was where the Mother House it was and still is today. Ironically, not that far from the Patchogue campus. But they were founded in Brooklyn. And apparently in the June 1915 graduates of the Academy of St. Joseph approached the administration and said their daughters were accepted into places like Barnard and Cornell, and they did not want them to go there. Because this would mean going away. Now, the irony of the whole thing is, and I have to give a shout out to our congregational archive in Brentwood, Virginia Dowd, the archivist. She was very patient and very quick getting me information at different times. But what found there was I was able to go through the actual commencement programs and I went through 1914 to 1918. And because I was just before and just after our founding in 1916. And what I found was they listed where the graduate had come from. So this is, if you don't know the area, this is 50 miles from Brooklyn. And most of the graduates of the Academy of St. Joseph were from New York City, particularly Brooklyn, specifically Brooklyn. The thing is, this was a boarding school. So they were allowing their daughters to go away to high school. But I guess they felt that the sisters really had control over them in a living away high school environment. I was told anecdotally, Virginia had mentioned to me that there was somewhere, there's papers where there was a father who was a businessman, needed to go on a lot of business trips. His wife died. And he didn't want his daughter left in, I guess, a nanny's care at home. He felt that she would, and I'm sure she did, have a better social life living at the academy and studying there. But then all these girls and their families wanted them to come home to Brooklyn, live at home, and go to college. So there is a connection way back with Adelphi University for people from out of town. Adelphi University right now is in Garden City, which is out on Long Island, but Adelphi started in Brooklyn. And a lot of the sisters in the beginning took courses there because it was a women's college. There were two men's colleges, Catholic men's colleges in Brooklyn. One was St. Francis College, which is still there. And then there's St. John's College, which was 2 miles away. It's now St. John's University in Queens. So those are the options. And they were founded because young men were getting out of high school and wanted to further their education. They didn't feel welcomed, at an NYU or place like that. So that's why these other places were founded. But it came, the Sisters of St. Joseph had an incredibly successful academy. And when they went to move, they said, we're going, so the Mother Mary Louis Crummy was the superior. She was literally a titan of industry. She was able to do incredible things as far as building funds. And she was the one who was in touch with the bishop, and they got together and decided we're going to do this. And someone said, someone representing Augustus Downing came down at this first organizational meeting and said, well, you have a successful boarding academy for the high school. Why don't you just build it out there? And they're like, no, this is a very particular need. There were many women who had not gone to St. Joseph's academies, although there were 5 of them in Brooklyn. And that's where a lot of the students started to come from. There was also, same as at St. Kate's, there were young sisters, they get out of high school, they enter the convent. Oh, here, go teach 3rd grade. Well, you finished high school, you must be able to teach 3rd grade. And they were very concerned. And around that time, it was the state ed department was saying, and this had nothing to do with the Catholics, we need better trained teachers. And so Mother Mary Louis made sure that they were going after school. Imagine teaching like 50 first graders. And as soon as the bell rings at 3, you're walking 2 miles to go to St. John's to take a course so you can finish your BA. But they got them through that. And then it became a matter of the sister faculty in the college getting grad degrees, preferably doctoral degrees. And at first it was fine for them to go to Fordham and St. John's, but then it was like, no, we want to start sending 1 or 2 to the Ivies. Even sending them down to Washington to Catholic U was a step up at that point. They were doing something national. So that was basically our group initially. These were young ladies with money, because if they were boarding for high school, these were well-to-do families, but they didn't like the model of sending them away overnight. And so that's how we started.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to mention, in the St. Louis province, so for the faculty that would teach at Avila and at Fontbonne, they were sent to Catholic U's summer school all during the 1910s. And if you're interested in what was that, it was a summer school for sisters from all across the United States who would come for 1 to 2 months to take courses to help them be better teachers in the academies and the other elementary schools at which they were teaching. So it brought sisters from many different communities together. in the summer. And the St. Louis province sent a contingent every summer. And we actually have letters back and forth from the sisters to the community back at the Mother House in St. Louis about what they were learning, what they were experiencing. And so sending the various provinces were looking for any way they could to educate their sisters so that they would be better teachers in the schools. And then, of course, when it came time to open the universities, they also sent, getting a higher education, getting a master's or a doctoral degree was of the same kind of motivation. We need them to be excellently trained, better trained, so that they can teach well. So that's part of our story as well, is trying to improve the educational quality of the sisters. And as that improves, of course, you get continual increases in the educational quality at the institutions where they're teaching. Let me turn to Sister Mary Flick, and I think after Sister Mary, we're going to move to some Q&A and invite you to share your thoughts and questions. Think about as Sister Mary talks here, and before we open to Q&A, what do you wonder about your own institution's history? What are some of the questions that you have, and what are some of the things that you wish you knew better? Maybe you could put that in the Q&A box for us, and that'll be something helpful for all of us in listening in here today. Okay, but Sister Mary, let's turn to you and give you our last group question here. And that's, where does higher education fit within the sisters' charism and their vision for their other ministries? So where does higher education fit within the sisters' charism and within their vision for all of their various ministries?
Well, our founder, Father Jean-Pierre Médaille, he noted in our primitive constitutions that a sister of St. Joseph was to do all that a woman is capable of. And so, unlike other apostolic communities that were founded only to teach or only to provide healthcare, the Sisters of St. Joseph from the very beginning had a larger possibility of purpose. Their vision wasn't limited by what they were to do, but how. They were to do all they were capable of with a love which unites. And that call has always necessitated the need for education of our sisters to prepare them to meet the needs they encountered as they discovered how best to serve God and the dear neighbor. We all know that we cannot love what we do not know. And so education brings us knowledge and an entry into greater love. And likewise, we cannot serve without the resources that the work requires. And so education provides those resources that are needed to meet those needs. And so I guess finally, I want to just say that our love for the dear neighbor, as you know, is shaped by our Catholic identity, by the Gospels, and by the tenets of Catholic social teaching. And it's in the Gospels and Catholic social teaching that we find clearly stated how every person has a fundamental right to life, and that education is a condition for a decent life. And what's more, our Pope has recently said in his recent encyclical that education is essential for quality human relationship. So really, higher education is essential for all of us who work, that all may be one, both our sisters and our lay partners in mission. I think higher education can have a tremendous impact as we provide the knowledge and the skills that are preparing our students to do all that each one of them is capable of doing, even bettering our world and the lives of our dear neighbors with whom we share this common home.
Thank you very much, Sister Mary.
Sure.
Well, we'd like to open up the conversation to all of you in the audience. And we do have one sort of big question, at least so far, and one comment asking Sister Mary if you'd publish your remarks somewhere so we could all benefit from them. So perhaps you'll consider writing these down and or sharing them with Martha, and Martha could maybe put them in a place where others can view them. So thank you for that. Then there's a question here about the College of St. Rose, but it's really asking some things that are broad, and we'd like to talk about some of those things. And if we reach a point where there's just no more questions, I have one more question I'll ask our audience, our panelists, but really we'd love to hear from you and give you a chance to be a part of the group here. So I've been trying to filibuster here a little bit to give you time to think about your question and maybe type something in. And I see we've got another question that's also come in. But let's take first of all this question from John Dion, asking about College of St. Rose and its link to a post-pandemic world and its impact on women in particular, and the securing of the right to vote happening around the time of the opening of the college. So the concern over the Catholic support seems central, but what about these other aspects? And if I understand the question correctly, I think this is a good question for also Jane and Beth, perhaps, and Sister Mary to maybe make a comment as well, very briefly, if you don't mind. But what were some of the other cultural forces, cultural factors at work in your respective region that led to the opening of the college, besides perhaps some of the Catholic cultural issues? Were there other things? We've talked about the era of the new woman, but can we even perhaps think about some more specific things that were happening in and around, say, St. Paul, the Minneapolis for St. Kate's, or in Albany, or in Brooklyn, that also contributed to maybe the hurrying of the opening of the institution? And maybe Sister Mary would like to speak to that as well. But let's go to that question first, and then I see we have one after that at least. So Jeff, we'll let you start since the question was directed mainly to you, and then we'll go to Jane and Beth if they'd like to add something.
Sure, thank you. And I thank you, John, and the rest of you who are watching back in Albany for that question. And post-pandemic here could mean, COVID pandemic, but it also means the 1918 influenza pandemic as well. And again, you have like a kind of a closing down of institutions and whatnot. And specifically in Albany, with the mention of the right to vote, our past president, Dr. Carolyn Stefanko, curated an exhibit at the Albany Institute for Art and History on the anti-suffragist movement, which was virulent in the Albany area leading up to the 1920, giving the women the right to vote nationally. And so to found a college for women in the midst of all this was, kind of like a really, where we're going to show you what we can do. So it wasn't just, addressing Catholic needs, but also addressing some political concerns in Albany. And Brian, I'm not trying to jump on perhaps your third question here, but coming out of that, it was not just, Augustus Downing, this Lutheran kind of like helping along behind the scenes, but Downing's educational history, especially with the founding of New Rochelle and elsewhere in the state, was focused on like a traditional classical curriculum that added professional studies to it. So the one of the ways out that shows that there wasn't like a moment curricularly for the College of St. Rose, but if you could pick a moment, it would be the 1930 through 1932 academic years, those 2 years there, where the nursing faculty was founded, and then in 31 and 32, the business faculty. So these kind of culminated what Downing wanted to make these colleges do, were not just to kind of like, quote unquote, educate women, and yes, sending them into the ranks of being teachers was very important, but also to expand the offerings. And it took them about a decade to get everybody there to start offering, what we now call like, I guess, like practical or real world disciplines. But Downing and, certainly Sister Blanche Rooney saw these things as working together, that women could do this. So it's not just, these are women and we're going to have them study these nice things, but the real education is going, elsewhere. In Beth Murphy's case, she has St. John's is 2 miles away. Siena College isn't founded until 1937. So St. Rose is already on its curricular path, which it's continued for the, up until now, combining the so-called liberal arts education and professional education together. And it did that, well before Siena was founded, and only for Catholic women. So, St. Rose is operating on its own in the state capital of New York, trying to show that these things can be done. So again, it's, it's like those, not just, like serving the needs of Catholic women, or like, like defending, the Catholic ranks or whatever, but also to show kind of, as Jane, Beth, and Sister Mary have said about focusing on the ways in which women can do, whatever they choose to do, that they can succeed at these things.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, Jane or Beth, do you want to add something else, things that were going on in your context immediately that also helped the
Yes,
founding of your institution?
I very much agree with what Jeff said. And so one part of the story here that's really important in St. Paul is that this is also about immigrants and the immigrant women, or the daughters of immigrants, and the need for those women to be educated, and for that education to create social and economic mobility for them, right? These were not all the students who, in fact, many of the students who came to St. Kate's early on were middle class, but they weren't wealthy. And a lot of scholarships were given to students. And so there was a recognition from the beginning that, yes, we educate these young women to the highest degree possible intellectually in a Catholic atmosphere. They will also be nurtured spiritually, but they will be educated in as broad a way as possible so that they can go out and make a difference in the world, whatever they need to do, whether they need to have an occupation or as cultural and social leaders in their communities, whatever that is. And from early on, St. Kate's had professional programs. We had, for example, a library science program very early on, at a time when that was emerging as a so-called women's profession for educated women. And so we adopted other professional programs pretty early on too, and we saw that as broadening the curriculum. So to help women to be the most that they could be, to give them those opportunities.
We had at St. Joe's, there were some defining moments in the early years where the faculty were becoming concerned that there was such an emphasis on teaching of children, child study, they called it pedagogy at the time, that they actually lowered pedagogy to a minor, because they were starting to, and this is in the faculty meeting minutes, we don't want to take on the atmosphere of a normal school. We don't want to be the Catholic version of the State Teachers College. We insisting on a classical education. They will learn how to teach, but we're not going to gobble up too many credits doing it. Another thing was, I guess in the local area, a lot of women were being admitted who weren't necessarily quite up to the task or weren't putting in the effort. And the faculty voted to make admissions more difficult. And it passed. And there's actually a section in here that I had typed out. They said, but you realize enrollment will go down. We could lose revenue. And it said, it would be worthwhile, this is a quote, if results show a higher standard of college work, we can afford to put up with a temporary loss of funds. And everybody knows that's a very courageous thing to do in any environment, but they said no. And within the year, they were very proud of themselves, and they should have been. Within the year, they were faced at another meeting with, we're getting really criticized with these high admissions and course grading and dealing with student discipline. And the faculty unanimously voted, we don't care, we're going to uphold the standards. So that's a seminal moment in my mind. It was becoming, in some folks' mind, oh, I'd love my daughter to go there. It's like social mobility, but they're like, no, but you've got to be, literally, you've got to be on time for class. You've got to come in when the bell rings. All this day-to-day stuff that was sort of falling by the wayside. And they said, no, we're not going there. So I was proud of them reading those tissue paper minutes. It was a good move.
Sister Mary, do you want to add something? Do sisters among themselves talk about things that they think about when they made a decision to attend one of the sisters' colleges and what might have been motivating them at those times? And
I'm not sure there was a whole lot of choice at that time. I think they were strongly encouraged to enter the sisters' colleges. And yet I know that there was a lot of encouragement also to continue that education. However, they had to find it, whether it be going overseas to study the arts or staying locally if they could to find the background, the educational background they needed to better serve the dear neighbor, and particularly to teach in the variety of multitude of schools that we had at that time.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Eileen. You mentioned faculty meeting and trustee meeting minutes in the archives. For our last Middle States at SJNY, I had access to all of our catalogs, which had recently been scanned into the from out of the archives. And anyway, there was a lot of helpful information there, provided good insights to our cultural and changes over time. Do other archives have these digitally available? And it goes back to something we were talking about earlier on. And I'll let my panelists say something more if they'd like, but that's going to be a archive by archive issue in the here at Fontbonne University. Yes, they are all digitally available, but that may not be the case at the other institutions. And before I turn to my panelists, I will say there's another thing, Eileen, you may want to look at is you mentioned the Middle States accreditation, but actually the accreditation reports, you can get those going back decades. And they tell a really interesting story because it's outsiders talking about what they see at the institution, having asked very hard and unpleasant questions during their visit. And I had a really delightful opportunity when I looked at our very first accreditation report from 1940 when we applied for our own independent accreditation. And it is chock full of insights into what was happening at Fontbonne during the 1930s. And we didn't pass that accreditation. And there's all kinds of reasons why listed. We eventually reapplied a few years later and were successful. But those accreditation reports are also really fascinating as we get a detailed look at from an outsider's perspective as to what was happening at our institutions, what they heard people say and what they actually saw taking place. They document all of it. So the accreditation reports are interesting. Those are less available in archives, but no doubt the accreditation agencies retain those. And in Fontbonne's case, we happen to have those at the Carondelet Mother House archives if they're in the early decades, and we have the accreditation reports, the more recent ones, in our own archives. But anything else, Jane or Jeff or Beth, you want to say about accreditation reports and their accessibility? Or I'm sorry, catalogs and other scanned important documents.
The catalogs at St. Rose and are not digitized, and the Carondelet archives in St. Louis have a great set of resources on going year by year, not just decade by decade, but somebody, probably Blanche Rooney, documented who were the faculty and their disciplines year by year. So you can see the faculty growing from 9 to 20 to 30 very quickly, along with the student body population.
I don't believe that those kinds of records are digitized at St. Kate's, although you can check with Amy Shaw, who's our wonderful archivist. To my knowledge, what is digitized there are lots of photographs, historic photographs. There are the yearbooks, the student yearbooks, the student newspaper, Ariston, the Arts and Literature annual, and maybe a few other student related publications, but I don't believe any of the internal documents of the kind you're talking about have been digitized. I could be wrong. So Amy Shaw is the person to contact.
Okay. And there's a comment here from Sister Carol Allen about, but it relates to something that Jane was saying a little bit ago. You know, Elms College, a significant influence in our founding was a Catholic immigrant population and access to Catholic education for women. And for Elms College, the chapter in our book on Elms College was written by Drs. Laura McNeil and Damian Murray. Excellent. It tracks very, very well precisely what Sister Carol Allen is mentioning here in this comment. The role of the Catholic immigrant population in the planning for the college, the founding of the college, the funding for the college is documented very well by those two scholars for Elms College in their chapter. So I encourage people to look at that, and other campuses, other colleges that also had significant immigrant populations. They in most of the chapters, that's also documented well or mentioned. And so good. Thank you very much for that comment. Anybody want to say anything else about immigrant populations and the role of immigration in the Catholic Church and how that influenced your institution's founding?
I would just add that the Sisters of St. Joseph of St. Paul were themselves either immigrants, the daughters of immigrants, or maybe the granddaughters of immigrants. So when you're talking, Mother Seraphine Ireland stepped up the boat in St. Paul as an Irish immigrant in 1852. Right? So you're talking about the women who were founding and teaching and running these institutions were either immigrants themselves, as I said, or the daughters of immigrants. So this is their story too. They're immigrants, or generations, just a few generations removed from immigrants.
And I think that's interesting, Jane, because as we know, we were founded in France, and yet such a large population of the sisters themselves are immigrants, Irish immigrants in particular. I think it was around 1860, one of our sisters looked, and 2/3 of our sisters at that time had either Irish surnames, meaning they themselves were either immigrants or children of immigrants.
Yes, here in St. Paul, the sisters are very much dominated by Irish American sisters, but also a lot of Germans, huge German population of immigrants. So.
And if you're interested in tracking some of this, the census records are available in a digital form online from the Census Bureau and other entities. And you can look up the address for where the sisters lived in your particular area, and they will list all the residents of the household and whether where they were born, of course, their names and where they were born, ages, and things like that. So if you were to look up in St. Louis, the Minnesota Avenue address and all those census records from 1850, 60, 70, 80, and on down, you can actually identify the sisters who were identified as living at that residence and where they were born. I'd like to direct this question to Sister Mary, and then we're going to wrap up. Sister Mary, there's a question here. How can all of us, particularly within K through 12 schools, our association is not just colleges and universities, it also includes our K through 12 partner institutions. But how can all of us, particularly within the K through 12 schools, continue to promote our colleges and universities, especially those that are women's institutions? Sister Mary, do you have some thoughts about that? What I would like to say, of course, there's the association website, acssj.org, that gives information about our member institutions and provides links to all of them. But maybe there's something you would like to share from the sisters' perspective about the heart of connecting our students in their K through 12 years with what's possible for them at the member institutions.
Well, I think, as we've already stated, the difference is in the formation that our students receive on our campuses. We're not just educating them academically so our secular institutions do so well, but we're also interested in the moral formation, that personal formation. It's really the whole person, as the Elms has used a phrase, for life and for living. Mm-hmm. It's about giving them the resources that they need to go out and make the life that will make a difference for them and their families, and also to make a difference in the world. And so, I think, yes, by way of how do you connect, it is primarily online these days, but it's the reason why we would want our students to connect. And that is because Catholic education offers meaning in life. And that's what I think sets us apart and is worth the investment.
And I'd like to add too that when the student comes into any one of our institutions, they can enjoy a semester or a year studying at any one of the other institutions in our association. A student exchange program exists for all of our member campuses. And so if a student enters at, say, Mount St. Mary's and would like to spend a semester or a year studying in Brooklyn, they can do that. And our association provides lots of these kinds of connections, as well as other sorts of connections to the sisters, heritage trips back to Le Puy and such. So the ability to connect our students to continue in experience of the charism of welcome and service to the dear neighbor without distinction is a privilege they get to continue to enjoy, and we provide even enhanced opportunities no matter which of the institutions they enter. But I think at this time, I'd like to thank my panelists for their contributions, not only to this book, which I really just say you've just gotten a little taste of it, but every one of your member campuses has a copy of this book or should soon have it in their collections in the library. I believe a copy was also sent to the for the archives of each institution. And if you'd like to take a look at it, you really will find a guide to so many of the important resources at your institution, as well as a chapter that tells something of your story that will help you in making your own contribution to your campus today. So thanks so much for being a part of our panel, to our panelists, and to all of you listening in and joining us virtually. I'd like to turn it over at this point to Martha Malinsky to transition us to our next session.
Thank you, Brian. And join me in thanking our panelists, Dr. Matz, Dr. Carroll, Dr. Marlett, Dr. Murphy, and Sister Mary Flick. We are so grateful for this conversation, your scholarship, as well as the 6 other scholars that contributed to this project. This documentation is really a gift to us all. And as Brian said, look for that book in your library. I would like to invite you to join me in an hour and a half. We'll have a little bit of a break here now before our next session, Love Without Distinction, a monologue based on the life of Mother St. John Fontbonne by Tiffany Hoover. So you'll find the Zoom link in the conference program. It is a different Zoom link than you joined with this morning. So join us at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central, and 10 a.m. Pacific. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.